YouTube, and then you can catch it on where you get all your podcast channels. Welcome to Bridges Live Presents Domestic Issues. I'm going to stop refusing to mention domestic violence because we don't want to put that out there as far as something in the stratosphere about what we want to create. We do have to be mindful, and I don't want to just throw that word around loosely about the words we use. We have to be very intentional about what we want to create. Welcome my co-host, Miss Lyn Twyman, who is the founder of A.S.E.R.S. Before we get into our show, first, Lyn, tell people about yourself. If they don't know, shame on them. I always like to shame people, so shame on them for not knowing. And then tell people about A.S.E.R.S. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me on the show again this evening. It's been a while, getting through the holidays and family and cold weather and all that good stuff, but glad to know that we're all back on task here. And I am a domestic violence prevention advocate. I'm also a survivor as well, and not just a survivor, a thriver. And I am a therapeutic life coach. And I do quite a bit of work also in the community, and I've worked on various issues related to violence and relationship abuse for over the past decade throughout the country. I'm also the founder of A.S.E.R.S, which stands for Leaving Abuse, Supporting Everyone, Restoring Survivors. And the motto of the program is Targeting Domestic Violence Holistically.
I have to tell people I'm very personal about on all the shows we've ever done. I'm not really, I don't hide it. This, when we have to speak, when we talk and have conversations, I do allow myself to be what you call vulnerable. And that's the only way we can live wholly. And that is a scary thought for many people. And it can be scary. And I don't want to take that fear or the idea of fear away from people to say, man, I don't know how they do it, and talk about their past or their stuff. But we can make this and live through this and thrive through this. That's why we tell our story. That's why we talk about things. That's why we as open and advocates about living. We're not advocates about death. This is not about death. This is not about, there are tons of solutions. I get it. Yes. And some people aren't ready. We get it. Some people are afraid. Yes. Some people are living in a situation they don't see the out of. Yes. But we want to let you know that you're not alone.
No, you're not.
And people always feel like that they're alone. And that's why we do the shows, to pull them out of that. Am I by myself? Am I the only one going through that? How can we be so definitive in saying you're not alone?
Right. Well, I think one of the key words that you mentioned is holy. And I think that some people may have heard holy as an HOLY. And in addition to that,
that's my sister right there. We don't practice this. This is not a morning show where we get scripts,
Not at all. Not at all. But also holy, WHOLEY. Okay. I had to go back and think if I was spelling that correctly or not. But holy, as in the spiritual religious context. And then holy meaning circular or complete. Right. And not having any gaps, not having any disruption. And that's really the goal. And so in order for us to live in a state of bliss or joy, if you will, which is what often people will attribute if you say that you're a holy individual, you're blissful or joyful. Some people may even attribute it to peace. But then also holy meaning complete. And this issue of childhood trauma, so many of us have experienced it. And what we need to do is just realize that a vast majority of your of your common everyday population has experienced some form of adverse childhood experience that has gone unaddressed. Most of our families did not have and don't have the proper guidance, teachings. When we look at the breakdown of society, and society has really been broken down for quite some time,
Right.
the whole village concept or community-based concept in a lot of areas are almost non-existent. You have people living next door to their neighbors and they don't even know their neighbors' names. And that can go on for years. And so we have to not necessarily reinvent the wheel or force things to go back to the way that they were, but now we have to learn how to adapt in this current climate that we're in and adopt new methods. No, let me take that back. Not new methods, but adopt very common sense methods that have been around for ages and apply them to relationship, first starting with ourselves in a very common sense way.
But the kicker is, we are taught math and we're taught the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s. Purposely, we're not going to get into the education system. We were never taught how to have a relationship.
Right.
And I don't know any place on the planet that teaches a person to have relationships healthy. Unless they specifically say, we're going to teach you how to develop a relationship with yourself so you can have a relationship with others. It has to be very intentional in the education process of where you go to learn that process.
It does.
Because just naturally, organically, in this Western civilization, and as people could see the backdrop and whatever, and yes, I'm a practicing Buddhist, and I do have to be intentional, say, with the Western civilization, because the Western civilization has historically destroyed the family purposely. Besides the family, they have destroyed the person.
Yes.
And we're not getting into that. So with the intention of learning how to have a relationship and not ever being taught. So some people are going to say, well, I learned how to have a relationship because I watched my parents. Well, I grew up with a single mom. That's not working. Mm-hmm. So that relationship, I didn't see a man come home to my mom and say, hey, young, beautiful woman, I love you. What do you need? How can I help you? How can I support? Whatever those conversations or healthy conversations you can write in some, what's the Black director out of Atlanta?
Tyler Perry.
Yeah, this is not a Tyler Perry. If you could rewrite a Tyler Perry movie, I didn't see that.
Right.
So where did I learn my relationships? TV, Cosby's, other friends' family homes. What if they wasn't as healthy or weren't healthy? So it's tough.
It is. And you brought up a very good point, which is that divide between Western culture and Eastern culture. Even to this day, and I'm a practicing Buddhist as well. I'm also a Hindu practitioner too. And when you go into these communities of Buddhists and Hindus, the families are going to the temple together.
Yeah.
But it's not just the husband, the wife, or the partners and the children. It's now the generations. It's the grandparents and if possible, the great grandparents as well. And that type of bond and that type of love and respect is something that many of us are lacking here in the Western culture. And so you're right, those lack of examples. Now what we have to do is take the current system that we're in right now and advocate for relationship education in the public schools, because unfortunately, in many regards, the public schools have taken over and replaced parenting.
Correct.
And educators will agree to this, that they should only, and I hear this from educators, and I've worked in the field for quite some time doing community-based programming. So many say, I spend most of my time disciplining and babysitting my students instead of teaching them. And because the Western community has created this, this vicious cycle, if you will, and so much of the responsibility has been cultivated out of the hands of the parents over the last several years and generations now. So now the system has to start taking responsibility for essentially what many say is a mess that they created, and incorporate relationship education into the curriculum, because at the end of the day, the world does not go around based off of money.
No.
It goes around based off of relationship, right? That's what really runs the world, relationship.
So the case scenario, person in a horrible relationship, but is clinging on to it for whatever reason. I think people are thinking that they can be talked out of it, and that's not the case.
No.
I think you have to be almost talked into understanding the relationship you never had with yourself.
This is true. This is true. And I can attest to that firsthand, as I said, being a survivor and a thriver, that not having, number one, those positive examples in my own home as a child, and seeing conflicting behavior. So basically getting, hearing the words that sound loving, but then the actions don't back it.
Right.
And so I think a lot of times in our community, especially, and in the greater Western culture, we throw around so many sayings and cliches, but we don't fully understand what we're saying. So, for example, going back to backing your words with action, seeing is believing. We often hear that term, seeing is believing. But how many of us even believe that saying, seeing is believing? How many of us have really grasped onto that concept and idea and learned to apply it to ourselves and then to our own relationships? And so when you come from a baseline that is unhealthy, or a foundation or a start that's unhealthy, you as an individual, there's that sixth sense that's always going off. It's always buzzing, and it's telling us there's something not right with this situation. But then to not have an environment where we can put these things in context,
you stay in it.
You stay in it. You stay in it. And so you're looking, you're literally looking for and searching for what you heard, even though the actions in that environment you were in never backed it up. And the other thing we have to also remember is that the brain gets so hardwired.
That's it. Yeah.
With certain types of, go ahead.
No, you're right. I mean, when you talk about the brain gets so hardwired with conditions, then it starts running on its own.
Right.
And the only way, you have to strip wiring. And I'm not an electrician, but I'm a brain neuroelectrician. But to strip wiring, that's a whole new development of education and learning. And the reason why I put the two difference: education is things you're taught, learning is things you absorb.
Right.
That's why I switched. I said it's things with education and learning, because you can be educated, but if you don't absorb it, then you're not really learning. So where does that transformation? And then once you share it, once you educate, learn, and share it with yourself, meaning you start to understand the process, how you are in the process, how you are in the living, then that comes from developing, and that's wiring. Because prior to that, it was just running so fast that it wired your own personal condition.
And what people have to start getting to the point of is being honest with themselves. you don't go to, none of us have gone to school and told the teacher, we can teach this class.
Right.
Step aside, let me take over.
Right. Right.
But somehow we
No.
assume that we know what to do in a relationship. And
We were never
honestly, that's
taught.
just when we were never taught. We never had a teacher. And so with that being said, we also have to stop creating narratives, even though many of us are creative people. But we now need to stop infusing our own narrative into situations. And instead of hearing everything that we hear and just believing it, we need to see the fruit. We need to see the manifestation. We need to see the action behind what is said.
The scary part is, I'm sorry, I don't want to. How does a person know they have created a narrative? How would they know?
So it's interesting that you said that, and I'm going to infuse a little bit of Buddhist philosophy into this, right? So in Buddhism, we're taught about not living with expectations.
Right.
Okay, and so the best thing to do is just abide, or just be in the relationship and see how things unfold, and don't be quick to commit or to obligate. And I'm speaking in terms of personal relationships, right?
Right.
And like we treat employees, or we're treated by employers,
Mm-hmm.
give that relationship, whether it's intimate relationship or even a friendship now, because many people have been quote unquote screwed over by friendships as well. Give it a probationary period.
So here, and I want, and the reason why, listen, people, I love visiting with my sister here when we talk about domestic issues, and we know there are people in situations that are violent, just incredible, painful, and lost. And then you're probably in a relationship with yourself that's all those things also. Going back to my initial statements, that I want to let you know that you're not alone. We really do want you to reach out. And Lyn said it great. She said previously our parents or whoever maybe didn't have the resources that you could have. So when people reach out to you and say, sister, brother, let me talk with you, it's not, I'm okay, I got this. We really probably want you to say. So the question is, can someone not commit to getting help and still receive help?
So here's what happens. A person can not commit to getting help, and there will be messengers that will come along the way.
Okay.
To try to show them the way, to guide them. And I have seen this happen not only in my life, throughout the years. And I'm speaking in terms personally, not that I was resistant, but simply questioning or looking for the answer, not knowing what my steps were, years and years ago. And then all of a sudden, someone come across my path and give me a good word, and then all of a sudden the light bulb goes on. But there will be circumstances and situations that will happen, and some people call it fate or synchronicity or intervention, and people will come along the way to give an individual good word. But then if they're not open at that time to receive it, then they can miss the opportunity to receive the healing. And then sometimes, and this is a thing that none of the listeners should ever want to get to the point to, whether you are a victim or whether you're an abuser, you don't want to get to the point where you are brought down so to your knees.
Right.
That now people have to come to your aid and your assistance to pull you back up, because you are so broken and beaten down, either emotionally or, as they say, God forbid, physically.
Right.
And I have seen that too. And that's the dangerous slippery slope for anybody who knows that they are abusive. They know that they're taking a page out of the book of somebody from the past that abused them, whether physically, mentally, emotionally, sexually, whatever the case is, or the victim who literally, we talk about that hard wiring, has become addicted to the behavior of abuse.
And I have drawn a line in the sand and things I've said about domestic issues and relationships. And when I mean we talked about relationships, we mean relationship with yourself along with others, mental health and things like that. If you are raising your voice or you feel the need to raise your voice, that is a violent act that signifies unhealthy ...
Yes.
I'm not going to say it's an unhealthy relationship. I'm not going to say it's an unhealthy person you're talking to, but it's something not healthy. Whether it's your health, and that should be immediately checked. If I was to raise my voice at Lyn and for whatever matter, get a point across, I don't care if it's jovial. I really have a problem with jovial raising your, because there's loud voices and laughter and love, but we're talking raising my voice to get a significant point. I find that still something unhealthy within myself. I think I think it's there, and that's my line, and that's how I drawn it. What do you think?
So you really raise a good point, because when we talk about even in the Black community, for example, so many of us were raised in churches where the pastor or the preacher hollered at the congregation, and it was an hour.
The fire and brimstone type preaching.
Fire and brimstone, right? To put in perspective, and I want the listeners to know that, as a spiritual individual, I personally, I've studied all spiritual paths, and I have a respect for all spiritual paths. But we also have to, I should say, understand how our experiences do formulate our perception of the world. So even the relationship within a church and within the leaders of a church is a kind of relationship. So if you have been accustomed to listening to somebody holler and scream at you for an hour, 2 hours, talking about the love of God, the love of God, the love of God, but they're hollering at you, what have you done now?
Right.
You've conditioned yourself to believe that being yelled at,
it's okay,
even in spiritual context, is okay. And so we have to, yeah.
As a Black Buddhist, and there is a difference because there's not too many in the globe that I have run into personally. And when you're sitting at a teaching, at a retreat, or when you first get into, and the Rinpoche or the Guru is talking, it's you come out of there, you're like, I barely heard them.
Right.
You're like, you're because you're in this huge, it depends on the hall or the room you're in, and they're talking. And I remember asking one of the monks, and I said, he was talking so low. He goes, "Were you listening?" And I got in my car, and I think I cried because it was, because now whenever I go, it is listening. It doesn't matter how big the thing is. When they speak, if you're listening, the vibrations and the sound just comes to you like if it's coming through a blowhorn. It is so crystal clear. It's amazing.
Right. Right. And so I think a challenge that I have for the listeners is to get comfortable with thinking outside of the box. Okay, if all you've grown up is in a particular type of community or in a particular type of culture, venture out of that to learn, not necessarily to find a relationship.
Right.
You can intimate relationship, but you can still make friends along the way.
Right.
And learn, because then that's what broadens your perspective, and then you start to realize, and you're telling the brain, wow, this really, what I've been dealing with for all these years really is not the norm. There is life outside of et cetera, et cetera.
Right, right, right.
It's just like if anybody's traveled to any Caribbean island, you find that life is slow, much slower pace there. And there's not much you can do to hurry anybody up. And if you try to hurry them up, guess what? They're going to look at you and pretend like they didn't even hear you and still keep about their business. Okay. And it is the same with so much more of the rest of the world outside of so-called Western civilization. And that is one of the first steps. Then, of course, another great first step is to work with a trained therapist, counselor, coach in order to help you check your own perspective in life and work through some of these issues.
Before we leave here, I do like to speak to this. When we talk about domestic issues and domestic situations, more Black men are in prison or in jail because of their violent speech. And that speech comes to do with an unhealthy something.
Yes.
And once you admit to, I have to get that checked out, your violent speaking is the engine clanking in your car. You may not know what it is and what's wrong, but this thing is sputtering and it sounds like it's going to stop and blow tires. I want to speak that to men, Black men throughout the land. Mental health has caused more of our detriment for ourselves and our relationship with ourselves and partners than anything in the health. What would you like to say to young women or people before we take off?
Yes, absolutely. So, to women, in terms of us or our gender or gender identification, we typically have outlets by which we can go to air out, to talk things over, to explore, to cry, to even scream, to yell, to laugh. We typically have networks that we can go to. But I want to challenge the women to venture outside of those networks and actually get into a relationship-based program or work with, again, a trained coach, therapist, counselor that can help you to see outside of just the circle of friends. Mostly, it typically ends up being other women or females, to air out and to start working through your trauma. I'm very happy to say that I have several close friends that for years never thought that they would go to therapy.
Right.
And they're finally doing it.
Great.
They're finally doing that, because they realize that they need something more in addition to be able to speaking to me, on a regular about their issues. They want a systematic way to go about doing it. And if anybody knows anything about, conflicts of interest, oftentimes it's not good for friends who's also,
right.
Again, therapist, coach, counselor, to also provide that professional level of support. So for women, seek that out, seek that next level out, because it doesn't hurt to have as many resources and tools in your toolbox.
How can people get a hold of you, Lyn?
Okay, well, they can reach me on my website, which is www.wearelasers.org, and that's spelled WEARLASERS.org. Or you can just type in my name, Lyn Twyman, lasers, and the website will also pull up as well.
I love you, my sister. We are partners in life. I know it, and that's why we
love you too, brother.
And you have a great night. Kiss those kids for me. And you guys take care of each other. Be safe. Be compassionate.